Well, hello everybody, it's Angie the Coder, and today I'm back with my second video in the series 2020 EM Changes, a deep dive. So today, we're going to talk about time. In the last video, I basically gave you an overview, an introduction, I dispelled a few myths, and I gave you a few surprises. But now we're going to jump into the deep end of the pool where we're going to start talking about how to level a code in 2021 using time. Once again, I'm going to point you to the source document for this video series, which is the link is right here. It's from the AMA. It's a PDF file. The link will be in the description below the video. Let's try that again. The link to this PDF will be in the description box below the video. Gotcha, finally. Anyway, I do recommend, if you haven't already, download that document and follow along with us in this video series, because a lot of what I'm going to tell you is in that document, and I think it's something you need to share with the other coders and the other providers in your life, and review it yourself. Get your highlighter out and go over it really good. So now that you know where this information came from, let's jump into part 2 of the series, time. The AMA has stated in that source document that I told you about that time may be used to select a code level in the office or other outpatient services, whether or not counseling and or coordination of care dominates the service. So that is fantastic news. Currently, in 2020, if you want to build a code, an EM code from the office or outpatient series 99202 through 99215, you have to document the counseling and coordination of care, and you have to, tell them what your total time was, that you spent 50% of it at least on counseling and coordination of care. You have to tell them what you counseled, or you have to give them the content of the counseling and all that. But you do not have to do that anymore come 2021 for those codes. Nothing changes for the other EM codes though. Counseling and coordination of care rules still apply to all of the other EM codes. So what can you count? All right, so if you will want to level your service in 2021 based on time, you will have to document the total time spent. And then here are the items that you get to take credit for the time. The time it takes to prepare to see a patient, reviewing test results and etc. before they come in the office or before you see them. Obtaining and or reviewing separately obtained history. So if you have to get a history from a parent, if you have to get a history from somewhere else, the time it takes you to get your hands on that history and review it, you can count that time. You can count the time you spend performing your exam and your history. It says exam and or evaluation, but that means your examination and your history. You can count the counseling and education of the patient, the family, or the caregiver. You can count ordering medications, tests, or procedure time. You can count the time it takes to refer a patient to another provider or to communicate with other healthcare providers, as long as that is not separately reported. You can count your time for documenting in the medical record. You can count the time you spend independently interpreting results. For example, if you independently reviewed an EKG, as long as you didn't separately report that EKG, so if you didn't bill for that EKG interpretation or that EKG, say you're in the office, place of service 11, and you normally would bill for an EKG, the total component for performing it and actually for interpreting. If you haven't billed for that service separately, then you can count that. So if maybe you read an EKG that the patient brought in with them, or that you saw in the medical record that another provider did, say you sent the patient to a cardiologist and the EKG happened to be in the record, and you were able to pull up the actual strip and review and interpret the strip. You get to count that time. And you get to count coordination of care as long as you're not separately reporting that. Now, we're going to go into some details a little bit later about that, possibly in another video. But you'll see there's a lot of not separately reported, and that's something that you definitely need to pay close attention to. And we'll like I said, we'll go into detail on that a little bit later. But these are great things. These are things that you're currently not getting credit for, some of these things. So now you get credit for that time. However, there's some things you cannot count. And let's start with the first one. You cannot count anything that was not done on the date of the visit. So any of those items that I just read to you, if you did those the day before the visit or 2 days before, any time that wasn't, or even after the visit, if you performed any of those activities not on the same date of service as the EM service, you cannot count those, unfortunately. So it has to be anything that was done during that date of service. And it doesn't have to be face-to-face time with the patient. It doesn't have to be while they're still here. So say the patient say it's before the patient arrives at your office. Say your habit, I had a provider, his habit was to come in early every morning, and he would go through a huge stack of charts, and he would read every patient's chart pretty thoroughly before the patient would show up. He never got credit for that, and I felt bad for him. He'd bring it up in every one of the audits I did with him. He'd say, but I read this entire chart and I don't get credit for that. He was a great doctor, but unfortunately the EM services didn't give him any credit for that. Well, now he will get credit for that. So when he comes in and if he can keep up with his time, if he spends 10 minutes reviewing a record and preparing for a patient who's coming in, he can document, he can capture and document that information and get credit for it. If he does it the day before the patient comes in, he gets nothing for it, except that the patient gets good care. If he does, say you're doing a referral, say you're referring the patient to a cardiologist, and you're actually doing the work of referring the patient, you don't get credit for that if you do it the next day. If it happens the same date of service, you get credit for it, even if the patient's already left the office. But once the next day comes around, you can't bill. So at the end of the date of service, nothing counts. Not towards your time. Of course, everything doctors do for their patients is important. It's good patient care, but unfortunately, you can't count it towards your time for that visit. So you also should not count your time for anything that was separately reportable. Example, let's say you're a cardiologist and the patient comes to your office, and you do an echo, and you review it, and you bill the echo, plus you also see him for an EM, that echo time needs to be carved out of your time for your EM because you're going to bill for that echo. Same thing, primary care provider, you see a patient, you do an EKG or a chest x-ray. As long as you're not going to be billing for that EKG or chest x-ray, you're good to go to count that time, but you cannot count the time for interpreting or performing a chest x-ray if you're going to actually bill for that. So that's where your coder can really help you out and help you understand when to carve time out and say, no, you can't actually count this time. If a patient came in, say you were a neurosurgeon, and the patient came in and they had with them, they brought their CT information. I don't know if they still do that or not. It used to be patients would come in with like a CD that had their CT information on it or whatever, and you actually had to look at do an independent review of the CT, but you're not going to bill it because it's already been billed by, say, a radiologist has already billed it. Then you get to bill for that time. You get to count that time in your EM time. If you're going to bill to actually do an interpretation of that CT, then no, that time cannot be counted because you're going to get credit for it when you bill it. Basically, they're just saying don't double dip. If you get to get credit for it in one place, don't take credit for it in another. You only get credit in one place. So That's time. The other thing you can't count, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail. I think I'm going to eventually do a video about how to do shared split visits with the new EM guidelines. But if you are a provider, say you've got a nurse practitioner and a MD working together and they're doing shared split visits, if they spend time together with the patient, they cannot both report that overlapping time. So if they're in the room, say for 10 minutes with the patient together, only one of them gets to count that 10 minutes in their time. So don't report any overlapping time that can be billed, that is being billed by another provider. Like I said, I think that particular scenario deserves its own video because that might get a little complicated. But if you're just a straight provider and you're not doing split shared, time's going to be pretty simple, I think. So let's take a look at the current time thresholds for CPT codes 99201 through 99215 and what you're going to see in 2021. So as I've already discussed in a previous video, code 99201 is going away, so there will not be a time associated with that in 2021 because there won't be a code associated with that. But as you can see, like 202 was 20 minutes, is 20 minutes currently. In 2021, you're looking at a range from 15 to 29. And the range goes, it's kind of nice actually, it goes all the way to like 99205. If you see currently, they say 60 minutes, but you'll have a range that starts at 60 and goes to 75 minutes. This kind of stuff is going to come in handy when we start talking about prolonged services. I don't know how many times you would do prolonged services in your office, but we're going to show you in the prolonged services video how these ranges are going to work out in your favor unless something changes between now and when they implement these rules in 2021. That is pretty much it for time. See, time is really simple, except if you're doing split billing, that's going to be complicated. And if you are doing prolonged services, it's going to get it. It's actually going to be pretty easy, but we are going to do a video on prolonged services so that you can see how it's going to work with the new code that's coming out. I hope that this video was really helpful for you. If it was and you're already subscribed, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'd love to have you as a subscribed member of the channel. Hit the little bell and it'll notify you when I drop the next video, which will be all about medical decision making. And then also shoot me an email if you have any questions at Angie@angiethecoder.com. I also have a website where there's a blog on this series. I'm doing a blog at the same time that I'm doing this video series, so you can go there and check out the blog. Also, we'll have the source document there as well. And eventually I may put some cheat sheets out there to go with the 2021 changes. We will see. That is my plan. Anyway, so check out my website with my blog at angiethecoder.com. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn and all kind of other places like that. So look for me on social media. All that information about how to contact me and follow me on social media is on my website and also in the description box below. And I will see you back next time. Until then, have a great